Forget self-parking. The next generation of cars will be self-driving, artificially intelligent, fully autonomous, and already being tested in our cities. But would you trust them on your roads? This is Roundtable. Hello there, I'm Shuli Ghosh. Welcome to the programme. Last month, a driverless car carried a passenger on Britain's roads for the first time. The car successfully navigated 7 miles of London's roads, albeit with safety staff on board. But just how safe will autonomous cars be? One of Uber's self-driving cars fatally hit a pedestrian in the US last year. So will driverless cars really revolutionise road safety?
It's full speed ahead for autonomous tech, with all the major companies like Tesla, Nissan, Ford and even Apple looking to build driverless cars. Market researchers predict a $42 billion global market and more than 20 million self-driving cars on the road by 2025. In the UK, the government's handed out $25 million in funding to develop the technology. But with 33,000 Americans who are killed in car accidents each year, automakers say driverless cars will allow for accurate and safer transportation, mitigating needless deaths. A recent survey in the US suggests 73% of Americans would be too scared to ride in a fully automated vehicle. So even though they might be greeted with suspicion, are driverless cars inevitable?
So lots to talk about. Joining me here in the studio are Mary Ann Russon, technology and science journalist, Dr. Zia Wadud, Associate Professor in Transport and Energy Interactions, Abby Silver, lawyer and author of several books exploring the legal and ethical issues surrounding technology, and Doug Jenkins, Motor Technical Risk Manager at AXA Insurance. Good to have all of you with me here. Let's start with some basics. Mary Ann, there are different levels of automation, aren't there? So you have number 1, where the driver still has most of the control, up to number 5, where basically the driver can sleep through the whole thing and the car is fully in control.
Yes, but we're nowhere near 5.
Right, that's what I was going to ask you. How far away is number 5?
I'd say it's quite far away. You know, is it an exciting proposition? It is a very exciting one. Will it improve safety? Eventually, but we're not going to allow these cars on the road until it does prove to be safe. But in order to get to that technological to break through. It's like breakthroughs we need to do. So basically, you're talking about a car that has to be on a highway with a load of other cars. They need to talk to each other. They need to know where each other are at the same time. And the car manufacturers' servers in the cloud way back also need to know where all these cars are at the same time. And if anything bad happens, these cars need to be able to react instantaneously in less than a second. So if there's a drunk driver in front of you or something goes wrong in the car in front, that car might pause, it might stop, it might start acting weird. The car behind it needs to make a split-second decision to pause, to brake, in order to save both lives.
And that's what we're hoping, that cars will eventually talk to each other.
That's what we're hoping for. But in order to do that, there's so many different technologies that we're going to need to have in place, which are not quite ready. And the question is whether you'd feel that that's safe enough to risk your family's lives, to risk anybody's lives, if it's not 100% safe, if the machine can make a mistake, if the artificial intelligence has problems, if the satellite mapping and positioning is not right. So, for example, GPS has a margin of error of 5 to 10 meters. In Japan, they're trying very hard to get that mapping and positioning of understanding where exactly the car is on Earth right. They want it down to 25 centimeters, and some companies think they can get it down to 10 centimeters. That's basically the width of a tire. But if it's 5 to 10 meters...
I mean, that's obviously the goal. And Doug, I know that this is something insurance companies are looking at.
Absolutely.
The goal is to have safer road travel. Is that going to happen with driverless cars, and do people believe that's going to happen?
Well, we're not going to wake up one morning, for instance, and every vehicle is level 5 autonomy. People are predicting a 25% amount of autonomy by 2030. So it's not going to be a case that we're going to wake up one morning, like I say, and all vehicles are going to be autonomous.
But if it's going in dribs and drabs like that, isn't there going to be a problem with some cars are fully autonomous and some are still being driven by humans?
It'll certainly be a challenge, but you know the way things develop. Look at mobile phone technology. You know that's developing, and the adoption will be slow, and it needs to be slow. You can't just introduce people moving around smart cities all at once. And for those people in a vehicle that will be able to do everything Abby says, other vehicles will not. So the way we drive now will change a little. But the whole aim, absolutely, the primary aim must be to reduce the casualties and injuries on the roads.
Zia, safety is one aspect. I know that you have looked at the impact of automation. What are the benefits of self-driving cars?
Well, if we talk about the impacts, I think we need to talk about three things, actually. One is actually impact type. So are we talking about safety? Are we talking about travel demand? Are we talking about the elderly and the disabled who cannot drive now? They can use these driverless cars, assuming the technology works, of course. Then the effect of congestion and the things like that. So that's one part of the impact. Next, we have to talk about who is the impact on are we talking about? So if you think about travel demand for the elderly and the disabled, this will be a huge benefit if they can use a car to go from point A to point B, which they cannot do right now.
So the idea is nobody owns cars. People can just call up a car if they need it, which would benefit people who can't.
Both, actually. I mean, you can, again, depending on how the technology develops, how cheap these cars become, you could still own one of these vehicles as well. Then you can go from point A to point B. But also, so it may be very good from the elderly and disabled perspective. But then if you think about from road operators' perspective, there's more cars on the road. Then the same impact might be different depending on the stakeholders we are talking about. And the third thing that is important to understand is how actually this technology is developing. So it's not only automation alone we are talking about. We need to talk about whether it's only the vehicles which are automated, or the vehicles are connected to each other, or the vehicles are talking to the infrastructure and the
Is that the Internet of Things?
It's the Internet of the Things, it's the ecosystem. So a lot of the benefits that we talk about in terms of automation will actually arise from optimization of traffic flow and things like that outside of safety. And all of these will happen only when there's a very coordinated ecosystem compared to autonomous vehicles just running, starting right now.
So you can't just take these cars and plonk them on the road. There's got to be an entire system, entire infrastructure. Abby, one of the big problems that I know that you've explored in your books in a fascinating way is looking at who is responsible when things go wrong with these cars. And is that going to be a major concern in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about when any accident happens, it has a tremendous impact on the victims' families and friends, and they tend to... They want someone to be accountable. It isn't just a question of perhaps seeking revenge. I mean, we've seen this recently with the tragic case of Harry Dunn, the boy who was killed on his motorbike. So his family, they want someone to be accountable. They want closure. And so we have this system at the moment where what we tend to do when there's a serious road traffic accident, usually involving a fatality or a serious injury, is we prosecute people. That is potentially going to become much more difficult with these very complicated vehicles.
Because if the driver's not responsible for the action the car has taken, and that's what we saw with the Uber test drive, which sadly ran down a pedestrian because the sensors on the car did not recognise or struggled to recognise the woman wheeling her bike across the road as a pedestrian.
Exactly. Although actually I was looking into this case, and that sometimes we don't get to see as the public exactly what's happened in the investigation. And I think that's another difficulty if there isn't transparency about what's actually gone wrong, because perhaps manufacturers don't want to publicise that something's gone wrong with their vehicle, and perhaps software developers don't want to say if it's a component that they've put into a car. So, I mean, these are all issues which still have to be resolved. The Law Commission, which is the independent statutory body which reviews our laws, was asked in 2018 to spend 3 years looking at how we may need to update our laws to deal with autonomous vehicles. They have made a number of recommendations, but obviously they haven't reached the end of that process yet. So we've still got a very long way to go before we work out exactly what we're going to do in terms of allocating blame. And just one of the key things that they did say in their first preliminary conclusions was that we're going to have to move away from prosecution and towards lessons learned. So they're very much thinking that if there's a serious accident, perhaps victims' families will have to just make do with not a full explanation.
Isn't this going to be a problem for insurance companies as well, deciding
it's going to be a big change.
who's
I mean, the Automated Electric Vehicle Act last year, which was brought into law, clearly states that the insurers need to look at liability, very much so, because, as you say, eventually it may not be a driver that is responsible. And
there'll be so many technologies involved, the software, the AI,
hardware,
the sensors.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds like a minefield.
Well, it's going to be something that will develop. And today, somebody runs in the back of somebody. It's quite clear. It's been happening a long time. Whereas in the future, and when we talk about cars, we keep on talking about cars. They're just vehicles in the future, motor vehicles. The definitions might change even. When you're going from A to B and something happens, the main thing for AXA, for instance, as an insurer, we're an enabler in all of this. And we want to make sure that where people are injured or the vehicle is damaged, then we want to make sure that there's no issue with regards to the complications that may follow.
Right.
So we want to make sure that injuries and damage are sorted out, the liabilities are sorted out. And if that act means that we will look elsewhere, not to a driver.
It's interesting because insurance companies believe that driverless cars will make driving safer. Would it surprise you to know that surveys suggest most people don't believe driverless cars will make driving safer?
Some research think 93% of crashes at the moment will go away.
Because they're down to driver error.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but the perception amongst the public, and I suppose it's partly because of these high-profile cases, is that that there is a problem, and as we know, it's not a perfect system now. Marianne, how sophisticated will cars have to be to make those kind of split-second decisions, or even ethical decisions about what decision to take?
Goodness, the ethical one is definitely, that's like 3 laws of robotics, kind of Isaac Asimov stuff. I mean, if we take it away from that, let's just look at taking the technology. We need to be looking at this. The technology only does what it's supposed to do. It follows the rules that are set that tell it what to do. So we are the humans. And when you talk to roboticists, they will repeatedly do, because I keep asking them, is it possible for robots to be sentient? Is it possible for them to understand emotion?
And to learn.
To make priority, to understand ethics. The roboticist said to me, first of all, what truly is ethical? And it depends on what human you talk to who defines what the ethical agenda is. Secondly, remember that this is still a machine. It can only follow certain rules. It can maybe imitate a human, but it will never truly have the consciousness of a human mind. So therefore, you need to take that out of the question and just say, will it do, if I press a button, will it do what I say it will? It's the same thing as old school technology. It's just that we're putting in so many different levels. So every new level you put in, there's more complexity that can go wrong. So if the vehicle-to-vehicle communication doesn't work right, if the vehicle-to-the-cloud communication back to the car manufacturer's server doesn't work, if the 5G mobile network goes down, if the map positioning has a 5 to 10 meter GPS error and the car thinks it's here when it should be there and then it bangs into somebody, Would you really want to trust your life on this if you're not 1,000%, not even 100%, but 1,000% certain that when you press that button and another button initiates and another process initiates, that all these processes will initiate exactly as they will and that nothing will go wrong? Because clearly Uber didn't want to run somebody down. This would not have been something they foresaw or wanted to happen, and they would have tried to have fail-safes, but it still happened.
Until we get to that point where all cars are fully automated and all cars are speaking to each other and communicating, and all cars know this car's doing 20 miles an hour and that pedestrian's going to cross here, and the whole infrastructure is in place, aren't we going to have problems with transition, a transitional period, when some cars are terribly sophisticated and some are like my battered old Mini with its 5 gears?
You can have self-driving cars. We do have self-driving car trials now. We have a car that goes from A to B. You make sure that nothing else is around A to B that he could bang into. You make sure there's a human on that car who can take over if there's any problems. And then you run.
But we've already seen that these trials aren't perfect. I mean, one of the premises in your book is about an automated car that injures or kills somebody.
Yes.
And there is a real-life example of that with Joshua Brown, who was in an automated car, and neither he nor the car saw what many people would consider to be a whacking great truck. Because of the colour of the truck and the distance between the bed and the ground, the sensors didn't see it.
Absolutely. And there's a more recent example I think in California, also with a Tesla, Walter Huang, who hit a central reservation and died. So he was a driver in control. He was on a motorway. Again, we haven't had the full details of what happened. But in this period where you have human drivers, or actually I think what they're trying to move from this idea of a driver to a user in charge of a vehicle. But during this period where we have somebody sitting behind the wheel and it's not clear when they are supposed to be in charge and when the vehicle is supposed to be in charge, there are so many problems which arise because what we've discovered from the trials which have been conducted is that if you tell a human being to sit behind the wheel but not drive, they become distracted. It's human nature. They start to do all the other things that they want to do.
And then you'll have that time lag between
and there's a time lag.
The driver suddenly realising something's wrong and taking over.
So we have to accept that. There's no point putting a rule in place that says all drivers who are sitting behind the wheel of a car must 100%.
But then how does that impact on your point about people with disabilities and elderly people? They're not going to be able to take control of an automated car.
Can I just go back one step? So the accidents that has happened so far they are prototype. We have to understand that.
Of course, yes.
So when the vehicles will come on 5 years or even 10 years' time, they will be much better than how they are now. And I've taken a drive on a self-driving car even 5 years ago, so I'm assuming they're much better now.
You're very brave.
I'm an engineer, so I trust technology a bit more probably. So by the time these vehicles come in, they will be safer. The vehicles which had accidents, they were actually level 2, not level 4 or level 5.
So just explain level 2.
So level 2 means that the driver has to be in control every second. So yes, there's automation, but those are driver assistance systems.
So the driver has to have their hands on the wheel?
The driver should always have their hands on the wheel. I'm not saying that people will follow this rule because people tend to push the technology.
Right.
Calling the technology autopilot doesn't help because then people have in the mindset that, oh, this is automated, which it is not. So these are the areas where actually regulators can put their foot in, I guess, that no, you cannot call your system autopilot because this is not automated yet.
So you think regulators should have a bigger role?
At some point, especially during the transition period. But I do agree that, and research has shown that we shouldn't go to level 3, which is where you still need to, so the human driver needs to monitor the environment and needs to be in control. That's a no-no. Researchers have shown time and again that if the human driver has to take control, this is going to mess things up.
Right.
Right. But from 2 to 4, if we jump to 4, and that's what Waymo and others are saying, they accept that we shouldn't go to 3, we should directly go to 4.
And 4 is?
4 is you are fully
automated.
You can go from point A to point B. But what we call ODD, within a defined operational design domain. What that means is that it might be within a fixed weather, like only in a good
Only in
weather,
fair
this is
weather?
fully automated, or only within motorways, you can drive it on an automated mode. If you get off the motorways, you have to be fully
Roadworks on a motorway.
charged,
Right.
It's a good
something
example.
like
That was
that.
actually the point I was trying to make, is that we now have these trials because they're closed-loop systems. So if you're going to have a system whereby you want a disabled person or an elderly person to safely get from their home to the hospital, you will require a closed-loop system whereby it has basically just perfect redundancy. Everything, it always works automated the same way. It's boring. It only does the same thing.
Right.
And there's no chance of anything going
wrong.
or any sort of intervention. It's like going on the monorail. Or
But a fully automated system, I know Elon Musk said a few years ago, Tesla would be selling fully automated cars by 2018. Of course, that has not
he
happened.
says a lot of things.
I mean, he's launched his cars into outer space, but he hasn't got a fully automated car. When we have these fully automated cars, who's going to maintain them? Who's going to look after them? Are we even going to own them? Are we going to just call them up when we want them?
There's more opportunity. A lot of people will say there won't be mechanics, there won't be these things. They're some of the opportunities.
Presumably they're
as
going to be
well.
battery operated. They need to be charged up.
Possibly.
Where are they going to stay when
They
they're
might
not
be battery,
being
they might
called?
be, different technologies. There's lots of different things.
Well,
being
who's going to
developed
plug
as
the
well.
batteries in then if no one owns them?
Well,
owns them?
again, a lot of people, currently there's 1% of people own an electric car in the UK. And the adoption of those, some down to price, but a lot of it, people forget to plug it in that night and then they've got no car the next day.
So if you have this fleet of fully automated cars that you decide, right, I'm going to do my closed loop because I need to get somewhere in this control, where does that car live? Who looks after it? Who makes sure it's charged up?
Well, there's talk about communities owning a method of going from A to B, because don't forget, these vehicles will not have a driving seat. They won't have a steering wheel. It won't look like a cockpit of a car. As we realise what it is, you just get in and you go from A to B.
It could become a transport network. That's more of what I was hinting towards.
Right.
Like, it's like a monorail system. So
Does this impact on jobs, though? I mean, what about truck drivers? What about cargo operators? I mean, are these some of the ethical
Well, there are some
questions
trials beginning.
they're already
perhaps
automating convoys of
later this
trucks.
year, so.
Right.
So if the truck is going the same way, and if you could block off a part of the road that was only for the trucks to go, and they're all going convoy in the same direction, and the head truck is the one with the AI, and they're all connected, it would run like a train, basically, on a rail. When a train is on a rail, unless somebody walks over the rails, it just goes.
But
It just
So
keeps going.
Is this going to be better for the environment, ultimately?
Again, the answer is it depends how the technology develops. So if we have a full ecosystem where you have someone optimizing the traffic flow, then yes, you could reduce some of the energy implications, some of the air pollution implications. But one thing we tend to forget is, again, assuming these things works really well, then there's a good chance that travel demand could go up massively. Now, imagine you have a fully automated vehicle, which could take you from my home to here directly, where I'm not driving, I'm not stressed, I can get some work done, or I can even relax. Then I may not take that trip by train, and I may take
And there
it
might
by
be
car.
more cars on the road.
And that means that there might be significant increase in travel demand.
Abby,
and
what
that
do you
could
think of
worsen
that from a
things.
safety point of view? And we've talked a little bit about regulation, but should there be more regulation?
There definitely should be more regulation. As I understand it, the manufacturers love to come to the UK purely because we have very little regulation, and so they've got permission to carry out all their trials. I mean, there are all sorts of things that we need to consider. So one thing, for example, is the software that goes into these vehicles. That's going to need to be updated, isn't it? Because, and then who's going to update it? And I think one of the things that the Law Commission's had a look at is who is going to be authorised to update the software on all our vehicles. And perhaps a person, we're talking about people with disabilities being able to use these vehicles. Will they be able to operate systems that update the software on their cars? Will they even know that their software needs to be updated?
We haven't even started talking
And
about
this is,
whether software can be hacked.
well, yeah, well,
It's not
if
whether
we're...
it can. It's how we stop it.
Absolutely. So just picking up on that point, because it's a very valid one, these cars are connected. So, we set up here in the UK the CCAV, the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, which was given £150 million in order to coordinate all the different disciplines which we need in order to bring these cars to market. But these are connected, as Marianne was saying. They talk to a central hub. Eventually, the cars will talk to each other. If they're connected, there's obviously a means by which somebody could, in theory, connect to the vehicle. So there are all sorts of issues. That also creates privacy issues, data privacy issues. Do you really want, when you're on your journey from A to B, wherever B may be, for other people to be getting signals of where your car is going?
On that note, we're going to have to leave it. Just very quickly, Doug, are my insurance premiums going to go up or down if I have an automated car?
It depends how well you drive.
Well, let's not go into that. Guys, thank you very much indeed for joining me for this discussion. Really interesting, and to get a glimpse of the future travel as we might know it in a few years' time. Thank you to all my guests, and remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Search for TRT World Roundtable. For now, from me and everyone here, bye-bye.